Spy Cops Info Podcast. Episode 5, more from the Undercover Policing Inquiry.
Welcome back. This is Penny from the podcast. Today at the Undercover Policing Inquiry on May 4th, they're going to hear from 4 witnesses. There's 3 police officers and 1 person who was spied on called Mary. The police officers are Peter Collins, HN303, Bob Stubbs, HN301, and Michael Scott, HN298. So we're just going to talk about Peter Collins and Bob Stubbs.
Yeah, and just to mention...
Oh, sorry, and this is Chris as well from the podcast.
And just to mention that neither Bob Stubbs or Peter Collins are given live evidence. In Bob Stubbs' case, it's simply he wasn't, though he submitted a detailed written statement, he wasn't called by the inquiry, which is a source of some controversy for non-state participants, I think, because we feel that all undercover officers should be called to give live evidence. In the case of Peter Collins, he is too ill to give evidence, and in fact he was too ill even to submit a written statement. Bob Stubbs, HN301, he infiltrated the International Socialists initially between 1970 and 1975. He also monitored the Anti-Internment League, Northern Irish Civil Rights Association, and the Troops Out movement. Just to explain a little bit, Anti-Internment League was a campaign against internment of Republicans in Northern Ireland in the early 1970s, and the Troops Out movement, as you might guess, was a demand for the British Army to leave Northern Ireland. However, Stubbs was initially tasked to befriend a member of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, and this person, who we don't know the name of, worked at a hospital in London, and Stubbs actually got a job there as a technician working in the hospital. And Stubbs also mentioned that he thought he was chosen for the SDS, for the Special Demonstration Squad, because he had a dark complexion and they were interested in terrorist activity around Middle Eastern politics, specifically Palestine at the time. Now, just it probably doesn't need pointing out to many of our listeners, but the Palestine Solidarity Campaign doesn't have any links with terrorism. I just thought I should add that.
Extra clear.
However, that didn't work out for whatever reason. The guy, the PSC member who worked at this hospital, Stubbs, also got a job at, they didn't get on, or he failed to befriend him in any case. Yeah, so after his failure to infiltrate the PSC, he moved on to the Hammersmith and Fulham branch of the International Socialists, and he hung around for quite a long time, for 5 years there, and therefore he gained access to other campaigns, as I said, Troops Out movement and the Anti-Internment League. So a lot of the reporting is pretty, routine, I would say, but he does make some interesting comments about the way the SDS work. For instance, he says he was given a free rein to direct his own tasking, so he chose what he was going to do, in other words. And he also says that the SDS gradually morphed into more of a general intelligence gathering unit. Yeah, one of the demos that Stubbs attended was the Counter National Front demo in Red Lion Square in 1974, where Kevin Gately was killed by police. Bob Stubbs says he was actually punched by a police officer on the demo, and he joins a growing list of undercover officers who were assaulted by their uniformed colleagues. That includes Mark Kennedy, and I think Peter Francis has at least spoken of witnessing vicious assaults on demonstrators by police.
Okay, and what other kind of things was he reporting on?
So, as I was saying, he reported on the Troops Out movement and Anti-Internment League. So, for instance, when he was asked in his statement why he reported on, for instance, the Troops Out movement, he simply commented that because of its supposed connection to Irish extremism, and similarly with Anti-Internment League. He meant in some of his reports, it's mentioned that there's delegates from Sinn Féin there, for instance. So you can see the connection now. One of the other things he reported on was a theoretical, a potential international socialist lawyers group, and he also reported on a group, a defendant solidarity group called the Belfast 10, and that's something that we've seen in other undercovers closely monitoring legal help offered by people.
Is there any reason that they seem especially interested in those kinds of things?
I mean, they reported on pretty much everything, as we know. I think, but it's especially controversial in the sense that, we're talking about legal proceedings which potentially containing information that is confidential to those defendants or their supporters or their lawyers, I guess. Yeah, one of the other issues about the Special Demonstration Squad and the operations is how far up the chain of command it went, how much detail was known. And on this, Stubbs recalls the Metropolitan Commissioner at the time, Sir Robert Mark, visiting the SDS flat. And that's in line again with what several other undercovers have reported in their witness statements. So if we move on to the other guy whose evidence was mentioned, it wasn't even summarised in the proceedings today.
Can you remind us what he's called?
Oh yeah, Peter Collins.
So that was Peter Collins, HN303.
That's right, and he, as we mentioned here, he was too ill to even provide a written statement, which is a bit of a shame because his deployment has one very intriguing element to it, which is that though he was deployed within the Workers' Revolutionary Party, they then, if you like, deployed him, obviously presuming that he was a genuine member, to infiltrate the National Front. So he became a double agent in effect. So it's a bit of a shame we couldn't hear it from him directly, because it sounds, of interest from that point of view. But it's also a bit ironic because up to that point, the Special Demonstration Squad hadn't deployed any officers into the extreme right-wing fascist groups at that point. So it seems a bit funny that the infiltration was actually directed not by the police themselves, but by this Trotskyist party, the Revolutionary Workers' Party.
Yeah, indeed, because I think we know that the sort of the threat from the right and things has been significant, but so often overlooked.
So there are several reports if you want to look at them. So it's actually this. We talk about the National Front. It was like a dissatisfied faction of the National Front, the Legion of St. George, they were called, and there doesn't seem to be much of a trace of them. Originally, that name comes from the Waffen-SS Legion from the Second World War, which was the section of the SS which was made up of British volunteers who wanted to fight for Nazi Germany. There is anyway.
Why were they dissatisfied?
Because the leadership of the National Front wasn't radical enough. I think that's what it says in the reports anyway. And I did speak to a couple of people who are scholars in sort of that sort of kind of area, and they hadn't heard of this group. So it does seem very much a small localised group who just met in a pub in the East End of London, which somehow Collins got involved with via the WRP. How the WRP got involved or knew about them is also a bit of a mystery. It's interesting though that obviously the lack of special branch interest in the National Front at that point, because it seems that it was the infiltrations of those groups came from the left. There was also a guy who was ran by anti-fascist magazine Searchlight, who also infiltrated right-wing groups maybe a little bit later into the late 70s, early 80s. So it was very much a case of the state's not doing it, we have to do it ourselves kind of thing. Yeah,
that sounds like a common theme, doesn't it? Unfortunately.
So there's quite a number of reports, lots of reports, in fact, on the Workers' Revolutionary Party. One of the points of interest on those is that some of the information was specifically solicited by MI5. And there was one sort of relatively famous incident where for people not familiar, the Workers' Revolutionary Party, probably the most well-known thing about them is that they featured well-known actors Vanessa Redgrave and her brother Corin. And they, for that reason, they had a bit of cash donated to them from the family, and they bought several premises all over the UK actually. But there was one place called the White House, which was renamed predictably the Red House in Derbyshire, which was raided by police in 1975 or 1976, the security measures that happened after that raid is reported in extreme detail. We think intelligence in a 30-page report. So to link to the other witness speaking today, Michael Scott, he also had some involvement with the Workers' Revolutionary Party, but we're speaking about him next probably, I guess.
Yeah, so hopefully there'll be a bit more information coming out this afternoon. Hi and welcome back to the Spy Cops Info podcast bonus episode. Great, and so we're going to talk to you about Mike Scott, who was HN298, who gave testimony, and also Mary, who was unfortunately infiltrated by an undercover officer and had a relationship with one. So Chris, can you tell us a bit about Mike Scott?
Yeah, so Mike Scott, he was deployed between 1971 and 1976. Mike Scott's obviously a cover name. He infiltrated the Young Liberals anti-apartheid movement, specifically the Stop the 70 tour, and also the Workers' Revolutionary Party, and a couple of other groups as well, which I might mention later. People who heard and listened to his evidence, I only managed to catch some of it, were struck by how bullish he was in defending the Special Demonstration Squad and their tactics. But when it actually came down to the details, nothing that he actually said seemed to give good reason to believe that the SDS's deployments were justified.
In what way do you mean?
The groups that he infiltrated didn't really do anything which you would think would justify those kind of undercover deployments. His predominant target within anti-apartheid movement was Peter Hain, and also who very much was on the in inverted quotes on the right side of the law. He his most gratuitous crime, I think he said, was having a sit down on the zebra crossing when he gave evidence on Friday at the end of April, within the inquiry. And then he was involved in more direct action orientated Stop the 70 tour, which again Peter Hain was a driving force behind that, but Scott specifically was involved with an incident we already heard about from both Jonathan Rosenhead and Christabel Gurney, and also Ollie Rodker when he was reading his dad's statement out, Ernest's, regarding a non-violent direct action at the Star and Garter Hotel in 1971.
And that's now being investigated as a possible miscarriage of justice. Is that right?
That's right, because Scott was arrested on that action in his cover name, and also perhaps even more seriously, he was party to confidential legal conversations between the genuine defendants and their lawyers.
Now, I don't know, I've watched enough crime dramas on TV that I feel like I know that's a wrong thing to do. I feel like should police officers not have known that's a bad thing to do as well? I mean, seriously. Yeah,
the concept of legal privileged information is not a new one. It's very old in England and Welsh common law. I think it's also on statute now as well. But yeah, for sure, it was certainly something that, if not lower ranks should know about, it certainly should have been rang alarm bells with senior officers once they knew about it. One of the other incidents which was flagged up and had quite a long discussion was his assault of an activist.
Oh, that sounds like another problematic thing, really.
As we were saying, he was quite bullish and not defensive is the wrong word. He was more aggressive than that. He was very much proud of what he'd done within the SDS without necessarily pointing to any actual evidence that there was anything actually to be proud of. So, for instance, he was accused of being an undercover by an activist within the Anti-Internment League, Joey Lawless. And in response to that, whilst driving in his car, Scott spotted Lawless in a phone box and got out of the car and subsequently punched him in the face. You might think he might have been a bit defensive about this, but Scott's take on it was more or less that Lawless, as far as he was concerned, was not a very nice man. He was a nasty bit of work, I think maybe is the phrase he used, and therefore assaulting him was absolutely fine. Now, I guess some people might find this shocking, but to be honest, that it kind of reflects the culture, police culture, is that some people, if they step out of line, or or are criminals or known to be a bit dodgy in some ways, makes them okay to mistreat, to visit extrajudicial punishment upon them. And that's certainly from growing up on a council estate in the 1970s and 1980s, that's also my experience as well. So I guess it did seem shocking within the context of the public inquiry, but I think most people who experienced policing, if you like, being on the wrong end of policing, would see that as pretty normal.
Yeah, I think that seems to be something that does come through as being something that's like quite standardly reflected. Unfortunately, it is shocking though, because it should be shocking, but it's also not surprising, I guess, in what it is.
Yeah, so going back to Peter Hain just briefly, so it was Scott. For people who might recall that Peter Hain there was reports which were from Peter Hain's flat and Peter Hain's mother's home as well, which included reports on Peter Hain's then younger teenage daughters who were under 18, and those were reports based on Scott's intelligence. Again, he seems absolutely fine with reporting on minors, people under the age of 18. And I didn't have any problem with it. And in fact, he commented that women, he probably didn't say women, he probably said young girls of that age have known to take up prominent positions in especially environmental groups. And there was obviously, it was a long testimony and lots of questions. There was lots of details which I'm not going to go into now, but I feel that I should mention a couple of the smaller, perhaps more minor groups that he spied upon, which had they were Commitment and Croydon Libertarians, and they seem to have some actual relationship with the Young Liberals, and they were spied upon. Now, the reason why I mentioned them is because I spoke to, I think, both of the surviving members a while back before we knew it was Michael Scott who was the undercover. And they were aware that there was a guy who maybe seemed a bit odd at the time. But the reports and also the discussion of the groups were a bit disparaging, in the sense that they were quite a small group and they were a bit disorganised. And having spoken to the two surviving members, they did kind of agree with that assessment. But I would like to say that this is like 1971, and they were organising anti-car actions and also a demonstration against the mining giant Rio Tinto Z, both of which campaigns have latterly, been picked up by many other campaigners. So you can say from that that they were, ahead of the game in that sense, even if perhaps they didn't have the resources to carry on the campaigns successfully.
I mean, if they were capitalists, you'd call them visionaries of the future, right? So,
yeah.
Just saying.
So Mary, one of the women who was deceived into a relationship by SDS officer Richard Clark, cover name Rick Gibson, HN297. She gave evidence also on May the 4th.
So Mary attended Goldsmiths College in London from 1972 to 1975. Mary's obviously not her real name. And there she joined the Socialist Society that campaigned with a bunch of different sort of activities at the time, like we've been hearing about anti-apartheid. They adopted a mine in Wales to support the miners' strike. And the Socialist Society organised speakers and groups and things. Mary also in her testimony made sort of a lot of really good sort of timely statements about sort of their campaigning against the National Front. She said that specifically the state was standing by the fascist organisation. The police, by their nature, were institutionally racist, and as a result, the National Front organised at will. So I think that sort of speaks volumes to the focus of undercover policing at the time, and even say the, it sort of echoes into the future now, I think. During her testimony at the Undercover Policing Inquiry, there was a period where she was asked a lot about the International Marxist Group and the National Abortion Campaign, and she went on to say, "I feel uncomfortable continuing to answer questions about the International Marxist Group and my involvement in it. The questions appear loaded. My activities were for social justice and defense of human rights, which the last time I checked are allowed in a democratic society. Seriously, I thought this public inquiry was meant to be investigating undercover policing." And I think that just speaks volumes really to what's been going on in the inquiry recently, that people who are testifying about such personal issues of personal nature really feel that they have to defend themselves in such a way when they're testifying. It's just inconsiderate. Well, it's more than inconsiderate. It's really unkind. She also went on to speak about her time as an activist and things, which is some of these feelings are feelings that others of us might have experienced as well. And she said, she said, "At no point was I ever involved in conspiracies or discussion that involved myself in illegal activities or violent activities. In fact, there were a number of occasions when I felt unprotected by the police who I should have been protected by. Our meeting at the East Ham town hall was smashed up, fascists coming into the building. The police were outside, stood back and let it happen." So I just think that speaks volumes to what people were experiencing at the time, and then compounded by what the revelations are with undercover policing. I think it speaks volumes again. So Mary talked a bit about her relationship with Rick Gibson, who built his career infiltrating activist groups and using relationships with different women to win trust and also build the cover stories. So she said about Rick Gibson, he was a frequent visitor to both myself and my flatmate, who was also an activist. And I assumed that our sexual encounters were a manifestation of a mutual attraction, but they proved to be half-hearted and fizzled out. She also said that Rick Gibson is known to have had multiple sexual relationships with women that quickly fizzled out. So she said, she also went on to say, "I find the whole strategy and practice of spy cops having sexual relationships with activists as immoral, unprincipled, and a criminal abuse of emotions. It is also an abuse of their own partners and family." So Rick Gibson was exposed by members of Big Flame who did not trust him, and in their investigation they found his birth certificates and death certificates for the real Rick Gibson, who the spy cops had stolen, whose identity the spy cops had stolen. Mary was astounded when she found this out. She was really, and so she went on to say, "He was always strangely unobtainable. He would not exchange contact details, and he always had a reason that he could not be contacted. He said he worked for the water board and was often away. He had no political back history, no other back history. He seemed to be extremely politically naive and utterly new to the idea of activism." And she went on to say that, "I am disgusted that the police felt it appropriate to spy on people campaigning for better conditions for working class people, for democracy, civil liberties and human rights. I'm not traumatized, I just feel embarrassed and foolish, having been used and conned. It really angers me that me as the police had no right to do this." She said, "The only solace I can take is that everybody else was fooled by Rick Gibson, as well as Big Flame found out who he really was." So I think she gave some really powerful testimony, don't you, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah, so well done her.
So hi, I'm Tom Fowler and I'm joined with...
Hi, I'm Lisa. Well, I'm a co-participant in the public inquiry and I'm known as Lisa. That's my pseudonym as part of this process. I tweet under the name Lisa Lan. So and it's at just Lisa 2010 if you want to find me. But it's usually under the hashtag Spy Cops or Spy Cops Inquiry.
Yeah. So we've just been at day 11 of the inquiry. And it was Lisa's first time live during this phase. And we had Celia Stubbs today. What were your impressions?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really, really powerful evidence, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to come and hear it. Come down to London, even though it's quite odd because you're coming down. You know, if it wasn't for COVID, we would be coming down to sit in the court and to, you know, hear it face to face. And actually, it's coming down to a viewing room where, you know, I can listen to the evidence being given. But there's just something that I wanted to experience about the whole kind of viewing room experience, if you like. You know, I tried to follow the first lot of inquiries, the opening statements and everything back in November. You know, trying to watch it from home while you're going about your life and trying to get on with things and thinking about other things. It's really hard to you know, it'll either completely take you over and you just kind of lose track of everything you're supposed to be doing, or you're kind of, you know, trying to multitask, or I kind of, you know, find something difficult and, you know, get up and go for a walk instead. And I was finding following it to be quite bitty from home and quite difficult. So I thought I'd come down and just, you know, really immerse and just see what it's like to be surrounded by the lawyers and you know, and being able to see how people are responding to this evidence as well as what's being said. You know, you can see people's faces and the documents that are being talked about at the same time, which is different from watching it from home. And I've waited so long for this inquiry, and we're going to wait so much longer for it to become relevant to the things that happen to us. But, you know, so in some ways I'm trying to think about, you know, stamina and longevity, and not just, you know, I can't do what you've done, Tom, and just completely engage with every moment of it. And I think that's an amazing thing to be doing, and somebody, you know, some people have to do that, and I'm so glad that somebody is. But I know that for me, that I can't do that, so I'm going to dip in and out. But I really do recommend people come and get the whole, you know, it's not the whole experience, it's the, you know, the experience under COVID, and just you know, getting to engage with it on some level is better than no level. In
terms of accessibility, like, they've made it incredibly difficult to follow closely.
They have.
You know, for everything from the PDF files right through to the, you know, the displaying of the feed, which, you know, as
trying to follow the documents that they were referring to and trying to find them on the inquiry website as they're being talked about. You know, all of that stuff's really, really difficult, and it's in sharp contrast to, you know, last week I came down to be part of the IPT case, which was relevant to the relationship I had with Mark Kennedy in the years, you know, the operation that in which I was spied on. So all of that was relevant to me.
And just, if you want to, there's another podcast episode of ours. It might have come out before this, might come out slightly after this, I'm not sure now, but Kate Wilson and the Investigative Powers Tribunal, that'll be a long-running series, I imagine.
Yes. So, you know, I'm sure there's place you can get all the detail about that, but the point I wanted to make about that at the moment was just that the difference with the, you know, that we always thought that was going to be the most secret of secret courts, and that, I'm sure that's probably what they would have done maybe if we'd gone straight to the IPT. But by this point, the IPT have, I don't know, for whatever reason, figured that they have a point to prove about, or they just, you know, have figured that actually this is something where they do need to have a degree of public accountability and openness because of the nature of what happened. But they seem to be able to deliver accessibility to the hearing in a very different way, and I, you know, it's really showed the inquiry up, I think. You know, I was able to watch that live streamed in real time from home, you know, in a way that was much more followable than this.
Yeah, Celia Stubbs.
That was really moving, and it was her evidence that I really wanted to come down and hear, because even though I guess one of the value of the viewing room is to be able to see the faces of the people who you won't be able to see if you were just watching from home, and that wasn't the case today, but I'm still really glad I came down to sort of give it my full attention, because what she was saying, you know, it was really moving, and the case of Blair Peach is something, you know, I think it's almost one of the first sort of famous cases of somebody being unlawfully killed by the Met that I was certainly aware of, you know, as part of my kind of political upbringing almost. And so to hear that she, you know, that they were spied, that how closely they were spying on the campaign for justice for Blair Peach, simply because they were trying to, expose wrongdoing within the Met. And I think, it's shocking, but it's not at all surprising, because that does seem to always be the purpose of the Met in lots of ways, protect the Met. So the police seem to be mostly concerned, or the most intrusive spying often seems to happen in a case where they're trying to protect their own reputations and their own, their own officers and their own reputation.
100%, and that that follows through right through to this process where they've. One of the things I thought was really telling was when she talked about the fact that there was only one undercover officer who admitted to have been at the demonstration where Blair Peach died. But he is one of the officers who's only referred to in a gist, because he's got so much anonymity. We don't even have a HN number to refer to him by.
Yeah, that confused me. I wasn't following that bit. I had to be told that by people afterwards, because but I think that's the point, isn't it? He's so anonymous, we can't even refer to him. So I've not heard him talked about before, because he hasn't got a number or a cipher or a handy way of being talked about. So he's just goes under the radar. I think it was really reminiscent though of the police's attitude in the Investigatory Powers Tribunal last week, where it was constantly like, well, they've presented no evidence about this. We can't say anything about this point because there's no evidence, there's no witness statements, and that seemed to be the case. That's what Celia was pointing out today, wasn't it? We don't know what this particular officer, we don't know anything about what they did because we've seen no evidence. And the fact that she's seen so little, they've shown that she knows there are files on her and she hasn't been shown them. All of that just seems cruel, doesn't it? The way
it is cruel.
You've got somebody in their 80s who was spied upon because her partner was killed by the police and she was fighting for justice for that. She's had all these years of grief, and that grief intruded upon and raked up and raked over. And then it gets to this point and they can't even show her files. It's insulting, isn't it, really?
It is. It's absolutely disgusting. I think another thing is that the line of questioning...
Yeah. It's chilling, and I find, as somebody who is likely to be interviewed in later stages of this inquiry, hearing how witnesses have been treated in this tranche is, that's had quite an effect on me, because I'm imagining myself there, and it's something that I always worried about right from the beginning of, if I publicize, if I tell people what's happened to me, I'll be the one who will be on trial. It's almost like if they say, well, what sort of violence were you involved with, to have been spied on like this? It's the equivalent line of questioning, isn't it?
It is.
Asking a woman, were you wearing a short skirt, or what were you doing out at night? How, what did you do to deserve it? And, luckily, I think up until this point, I've been spared that in lots of ways. I was expecting a lot more of that. But it feels like the inquiry is finally where that is going to be delivered. It's absolutely what the inquiry wants to know from each person is, what did you do to deserve this treatment? It's not, they're not examining what the police did as much as they're examining what we did, and that's not a very nice thought, really.
No.
And it's disappointing. I didn't think that's the way this would necessarily shake down, but like I say, I'm not surprised, but it is shocking.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good point that Kate made when you interviewed her earlier this week, that we shouldn't stop being shocked by this.
Yeah.
Just because it's shocking, just because it's not surprising, and we know this stuff happens, we shouldn't stop finding it shocking, because if we're not shocked by it, then it becomes normal.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't be part of normalising this kind of attitude.
100%. Yeah.
And the other thing I was thinking about while Celia was giving evidence today was, because I wanted to read a bit of background about her case, so I read the book that actually was brought up by the Counsel to the Inquiry, which was quite surprising. I'm surprised they referred to this book, but pleased that they did, because she attaches some of it in her evidence, and it's a book called, I think it's called A View to a Kill by David Ransom, who, and it's an account of the inquest into the unlawful killing of Blair Peach.
It was a murder. And I really,
I said unlawful killing. They didn't even find that.
No.
They found it death by misadventure, they concluded. But like you say, it was murder.
that these lawyers and the chair of this inquiry have referred to it in the, had died resulting to a blow to the head.
Yeah.
And that's as close as they'll get. And it's like,
yeah, absolutely.
He got beaten to death by the SPG. That's what happened.
He did, yeah. And they, when those officers were searched, their lockers were searched, weapons were found.
Nazi paraphernalia.
Yeah, in the house of one of them. Yeah, exactly. But what was reading about the inquest and then coming to the inquiry, I was really struck by the similarity in the attitudes and in a lot of respects. The inquest was really, so much of it was interrogating the witnesses, or the people who'd seen this happen. They'd seen Blair Pleach be beaten up and hit across the head by the police. They themselves were then questioned as if, well, you were part of the crowd, you must have thrown stones at the police, you must have, it was like each witness becomes the person somebody on trial, and then coming to the inquiry, and they treated Celia much nicer than previous witnesses, but it was still the same line of questioning, that same kind of, but what were you doing, that what did you do to deserve this treatment? And that's it's quite horrifying when actually what she did was have her partner killed by the police and then campaign for justice over that. That's what she was doing. Yeah. And so it's even doubly shocking. But I think that line of inquiry is obviously the inquiry really are setting out that as that's their line. They're going to do that.
Yeah, it would appear so, and as disgusting as the line of questioning I really thought was, just the very fact that they were like making her relive that day, there was no need for that.
Yeah.
There's just I don't see why they thought that was to do that's okay. It's like everything that she told us, as powerful it was, and God was it powerful. Yeah. She's done this, like she's been doing this for half her fucking life.
I know.
You can find that information. You didn't need to take her through that again. Why have you done this to her?
It's all in her written statement. That's
the
thing. She didn't need to say it.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe she wanted to. Maybe she wanted to, explain and really try and get across what had actually happened to her. Maybe she was hoping that she could break through to Mitting somehow, and with the power of what she had to say.
I think she was really good at saying what needed to be said without being asked about a whole bunch of stuff. But it was the particular questions that she was asked. Yeah. Specifically, if I could just take you to that day. It's emotive language that's being used, and also like recurring, like she kept the questioner kept going back to. We see here again, don't we? The strength of feeling. There's still strong feeling. There's still as if that's going somewhere. As if it's going to lead up. And we see now the strong feeling erupts in violence. The police were required the whole time. That somehow the fact that these things there was no violence in the end was like, well. If you hadn't been so bothered about it, perhaps you wouldn't have only got any spy cops in your life. Yeah,
exactly. And somehow that there was, because she was part of a campaign that was relying on that strength of feeling, or that to get justice. That's what they were doing. They were raising awareness of what had happened. They were, it was almost as if she was being accused of stoking a strength of feeling. Yeah. In order to achieve what she wanted to achieve with her campaign, rather than, she was trying to get justice for a murder victim, is what was happening. And like you said, that there was a constant implication that might have led to some violence, whereas actually, as she puts it, they were trying to stay one step ahead of the campaign in order to protect, so that they could defend themselves and protect themselves from the campaign. Yeah. Not because they were worried about public disorder or anything like that.
No, entirely. Like you said earlier, it's the Met protecting the Met. It's it's the most important calling.
Yeah, absolutely. And but then it was the image of the funeral that was really visual. I thought she talked about how it was the close family of Blair Peach. Somebody had been murdered. The close family who'd come to grieve for their family member, but that there was also 10,000 people there who'd and that shows how important an event this was to the community, and how huge that must have been at the time. But also how chilling it was that there were all these undercover officers at that funeral, wanting to know who was there, writing down names of people who were there,
taking photographs,
and those photographs still being on file now.
Yeah,
it's it's shocking, and it's very moving, and the way, like you say, the sort of the real probing questioning wasn't about what was going on there and why was all of that happening. It was it was more about what she was up to and what the Socialist Worker Party were doing, and which meetings she was going to and demos she was going to,
and that that there'd been calls for pickets outside police stations. What do you mean by that? It's like there is the danger of disorder then, isn't there? It's like
yeah, and I don't know, I guess the other thing, I suppose where we're coming from that is different, I suppose, to where the inquiry is coming from, is this idea that that demonstrations, public displays of strength of feeling, all of this stuff is crucial to a functioning society, and all of this stuff needs to happen, rather than the attitude the kind of default they seem to be coming from of like the police are trying to control all of this stuff because this stuff is a sign of something being out of control, or something being uncontrolled, and that's the thing. Whereas we're coming from the point of view of like police stations need to be picketed sometimes, and streets need to be occupied sometimes, and the National Front needs to be opposed.
Absolutely.
That's the default that we're coming from.
Yeah.
And the inquiry clearly isn't coming from that default.
It's not even looking at the what would happen otherwise. If nobody had cared about the fact that police being killed. They've made such a fuss recently about the miscarriage of justice of the people who got arrested for blockading the Star and Garter Hotel in Richmond for the Lions tour.
Yeah.
But the miscarriage of justice of a police officer murdering a member of the public in the street. And all this, with the National Front, it's the march was legal, and they were. Imagine if nobody had stood in the way of the National Front in the late 70s.
Yeah, exactly.
What kind of country do you want us to live in?
Where would we be now? And I think it's something that lots of people have asked repeatedly as part of this process. It's like, well, where would we be now if it wasn't for all this spying as well? So where would we be now if nobody done that? We hadn't been demonstrating on the streets against apartheid, and there hadn't been the women's liberation movement, there hadn't been people opposing the National Front. But where would those campaigns? How much further on would those campaigns be? Maybe we wouldn't have to still be protesting this shit if there hadn't been all that spying back from the 70s and 80s, because we've seen already how much they were stifling these movements. They were standing for positions of power within these groups, which was stopping other people who were genuine from doing the work that needed to be done. They were kind of they were stifling these movements,
undermining them.
Absolutely.
It's people like Celia Stubbs, right, who's incredibly powerful, inspirational activist. She spent her life fighting the injustice of her partner getting killed. Imagine she'd been able to go out there and actually do the things that got her involved in radical politics in the first place.
The things that she was doing back then.
Right, we all know people who've ended up, in court all their lives fighting things because, they wanted to actually, take real action, but they just got caught up in a rearguard action against repression, And
I wonder if that's what's happening to us.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. I've no doubt. This came up quite strongly in the Investigatory Powers Tribunal because they were looking at the human rights breaches in relation to freedom to protest, rights to protest. So freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, that kind of thing. It's just, it is, if there weren't, that spying that happened, it really did curtail our ability, our freedom to do these things. And I definitely think that's happened to me. It's definitely impacted my ability to go on demonstrations, to put, when you've put all your energy into campaigning and then you discover what was going on with those campaigns and how those campaigns were being thwarted. It's really hard to push through that and to carry on campaigning. I'm so glad some people still are, and I'm so glad that movements are still continuing, that there are new protest movements springing up all the time. And in some ways, I kind of wish that those movements would be looking back at this history that's coming up through the inquiry and what happened to protests back then, and in order to learn the lessons. But then in other ways, I'm glad that people are just carrying on with doing what they're doing and not letting this kind of feeling of futility and what could we have achieved without this, not letting that get to them.
It's such a balance, isn't it? You don't want people to be paranoid, you don't want people to be stopped from doing action, but you want them to be
aware,
alert.
Yes, absolutely, and to know that how movements were policed back then is going to have a huge bearing on how movements are policed now. It's not, as we've seen with the attitudes that we experienced that were first came up in the units back then, that there isn't a huge, they're not worlds apart. These the way the movements are being policed today and the way they were being policed back then. So it's important lessons, but like you say, how to learn those without letting them further stifle you it's a fine balance, and it's not a balance that I've managed to strike.
There was a period of time where any sort of political meeting I might rock up to, everybody was paranoid as hell. New people were paranoid. Like, new people aren't so paranoid, it would appear at the moment, which is good to see. I was at the Kill the Bill march the other day, and it was just, aside from the fact that there's plenty I could disagree with, and plenty I think they're doing wrong, and it's not how I would do it, and all that guff. But there was just a whole bunch of young people who were like kind of making their own narrative, and that was really heartening to see, and maybe feel a bit old, but it was.
Then I guess that's what we did. We had our moment where older activists would stand on the sidelines saying, "Oh, you shouldn't do it like that. You should do it like this." And us going, sod you, we'll do it the way we want to do it. I don't want to be that person on the sidelines saying, don't do it the way. But I would like people not to make the mistakes that we made, or at least, like you say, not to let that paranoia get to them. So to have that trust, but without the kind of naivety maybe that I had. And I would like, whilst I don't want people to be paranoid, I want people to know that at least is a possibility of something that could happen.
Yeah, and just the length the state will go to with this is much further than you think it is.
Yeah. So we were so it's all so much more of a threat.
To find out more about this topic, please visit spycops.info, where you can find all the old episodes, subscribe to our newsletter, join our Facebook group, and a lot more besides. We're grateful to the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance for their support, which has allowed us to buy some microphones. We want to improve more. If you'd like to support the podcast, please get in touch.